You can all join palms. And repeat after me. I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
In the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thanks for showing up. Anyone here for the first time? What brings you here? I see a couple hands in the back. Anyone want to share why you're here? Yeah?
I'm here because I just went through rehab and just been going through an addiction, and so just here for some mindfulness and seeing what it's all about.
Nice. Well, glad you're here. You made it this far, so you're doing something right.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Welcome. And who else? Sure.
I'm here to tell you what it is.
Yeah.
Peacefulness and mindfulness.
Yeah. Anyone else here for the first time want to share why? All that peacefulness, mindfulness stuff that everybody's looking for. Not sure if I should say this, but those of you who've been coming here or around this stuff a long time, have you found the peacefulness or mindfulness?
More.
So you two, we got one. Dana, yes. Dana's like our, what do they call, like a poster child? Is that appropriate to say a poster child?
That sounds awful.
Sounds awful, right? You are the poster child. But other than Dana, most people almost never find the peacefulness and mindfulness that people who come to this practice think that they're going to find. I know that might sound completely ridiculous, and next thought might be, well, then why the F am I even here, right? If I don't get this peacefulness stuff, if I don't get this mindfulness stuff, why even do this, right? We do this to be, one reason, we do this to be able to be okay with all the craziness. So for those who are maybe new to this or newer to this, it's not always about finding this incredible sense of peace or joy or like, it's not, to me, this isn't like a blissful thing, at all. It's actually learning to be okay with all of the madness, all of the craziness, all of the mind that drives you crazy, all the things that lead to craving and desire and addictions and whatever else it might be. It's actually learning to be okay with that crazy mind that is leading us to all these other things. And on one hand, you could say, well, that in and itself is peaceful. But there is, I think, tremendous beauty in learning to be at peace within all of the chaos and all of the madness. But what I'd like people to understand, at least for me as a practitioner and from my perspective, is that learning to be at peace with all of the chaos and all of the madness is very different than often new people who think that there's some peace out there that you have to get to. And the reason I kind of do that illustration of like, hey, who here has found that peace and mindfulness, is to really continue to motivate and inspire those of you who are new or newer to this. And if 3 months in, if 3 years in, you're like, well, how come I don't have peace yet? Then often one might give up and think, well, this Buddhist thing doesn't work, I'm not at peace. If you're alive, if you're breathing, if you're clean, if you're sober, and if you're okay with all the shit that's in your head, that's pretty peaceful. Relative to the peace that many of us have been carrying around in our heads for so long, which is anything but peace. So, I've in essence set the bar very, very low for this practice. And I think that's a really beautiful place to be, because that just makes sense. Again, for me as a practitioner, I'm just making shit up like everybody else who sits up here. So I'm just sharing my experience. But once I removed the bar at all of there being anything that I had to attain, any sense of peace, any sense of joy, any sense of mindfulness, once I removed all of that, then everything became okay. And in essence, the Heart Sutra, which we go into on Sundays, but it's one of the Buddhist teachings that it talks very specifically about that with nothing to attain. And so there's a couple approaches to Buddhist practice. Actually, according to the Buddha, there's 84,000 approaches to Buddhist practice. So only being with you all tonight for an hour, we don't have time to get into too many of them, but I'll point out two very simple ways. One, just sit. Another, try to figure all this stuff out. And for me as a practitioner, once I stopped trying to figure anything out, life became incredibly beautiful. So, learn to sit with the madness. And with that, one begins, I think, to abide in a sense of peace and calm, because the chaos falls away. So, all right, with that, we'll start with the meditation practice. To those who are joining virtually, glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. Feel free to say hello as you are. A couple things to tell you for those who might be brand new or sitting with me for the first time. Nothing's going to happen to you. Right? You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos, and this practice is learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you are in a cushion, often it helps slide into the front third. Pushing the stomach forward allows the back to straighten. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, just try to sit up straight, relaxing the shoulders, hands are on the knees or lap, whatever's comfortable. If you have a posture you're usually sitting in, I suggest you try to break that posture. That posture that you're used to sitting in is very much a reflection of the anger and frustration that's in your mind. So I suggest sitting up straight. I'll guide us as we begin. We'll settle into a little bit of silence. Most important, do not expect anything. We're just going to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed, whatever's comfortable. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continuing this practice. Observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting. Breathing. letting go of expectations, letting go of judgments from your practice, just sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And when ready, slowly opening the eyes. Slowly beginning to move. And most important, the practice of meditation. So recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. And ask yourselves how you'd prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind. Whatever you're sitting with at this moment has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how we sit, hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. What that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's it. That's what we get. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. This practice is not easy. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into this present moment. And as I alluded to at the beginning of this evening, the present moment is very often filled with conflict, chaos, difficulties, challenges. This is learning to be with all of that as it arises. And then making choices coming from a place of kindness and compassion, not from greed and anger. So the awareness of our thoughts is critical. Meditation practice is an opportunity to sit quietly, sit still, relatively still, if you're doing a seated meditation practice, and just breathe. And to begin to see the nature of your crazy mind. And to just sit with that. Watch it. Observe it. And do nothing with it. If we did nothing with half of the thoughts we have all day long, you would have created so much less chaos in your life. But most of us act on the shit that's in our head. And that's where the problems come in. Learning to be with the thoughts as they arise. To understand the impermanent nature of all of them, meaning they're always changing. They're never right or wrong. They're just changing constantly. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. Sitting, breathing, becoming aware of what you think, what you say, and what you do. And that's it. And that just repeats. Every day we have opportunities to think kind thoughts, speak good words, and do good deeds. And that's it. So it's a practice. For those who are brand new, we call this a practice. It's not a 6-week course. It's not something after 3 years you pass and you're done. It is a daily practice, because if you haven't figured it out right, if you haven't figured it out yet, God, that was hard to say. People are not going to spend their lives doing what you want them to do. And so much of the struggle and chaos in our lives is because we want other people to do what we want them to. So once we set that down, and we work on our mind and our reaction to what's happening around us, life gets simpler. That peace that everybody is seeking, by default, it appears. Not from chasing it, but actually from setting down all the stuff you've been carrying with you for so long. So, with that, I'll pause. For me, I always prefer responding to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. And again, for those who are joining virtually, welcome, glad you're here. Feel free in the chat box there, if you have any questions, to put them there. I'll do my best to respond. And we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for thoughts or questions.
I first asked the room if who was Buddhist, and I think 99% of the hands stay down. So I was curious if you could elaborate what it means to be, if you are Buddhist, versus an observer of Buddhism.
Yeah.
And are you Buddhist?
Am I Buddhist? Yeah, good question. For those who maybe didn't hear it, or those virtually, the question was, you've heard me say, I'll paraphrase this, you've heard me say and kind of give the example of asking the room who's Buddhist, and 99% of the hands stay down. My joke always is usually like one hand that goes up, and then there's one person who's like half and half because they're not sure, you know? And so then your question is, what makes somebody Buddhist versus someone who maybe observes Buddhism, sees it? And then your question towards me was, am I Buddhist, right? So let's see, I'll start here. Some of the insight into why I share that the way I do, as far as, the show of hands, is very often I do that. Now I'm giving away all my tricks, my secrets all these years. But very often I do that because every time we do these classes, and I do these intro classes twice a week, almost every single time there's somebody here for the very first time, as you know. You've been around for years. And so I often will show that and say that as an example to show people that this practice isn't about being Buddhist, right? That the people who come here, they're Christian, they're Catholic, they're Muslim, they're Jewish, they're pagan, they're Mormon, lack thereof, or whatever. But that people are trying to find a sense of peace and happiness, as a couple of the comments earlier. So then the question is like, well, okay, but then what makes one Buddhist, right? It's a difficult kind of direct answer, because as I was always taught, my master used to say one could shave their head and put on a robe, and that doesn't mean they're Buddhist. It's what's in their mind and in their heart and in their actions that makes one Buddhist. So by that definition, one who chooses to identify as a Buddhist because the teachings are important to them, beautiful, right? It's not like, I'm, coming to the personal question, then I'll come back to the original part, but, I'm Jewish by birth and by family and bar mitzvah, so I officially became an adult at 13 and was totally free, and then became Buddhist. And so as Richard Gere kind of coined the phrase of Jubus, for those of you who've never heard it, a Jewish Buddhist, have you heard that, is a Jubu. And ironically enough, the largest percentage of Buddhists in this country that practice and identify as Buddhist come from the Jewish faith, which is fascinating, right? I think it has something to do with guilt, and Buddhists, you can set all that down, but apparently Jews are not the only ones who own guilt, So, if my mother's here, I'm Jewish. If I'm not around my mother, I'm Buddhist. If I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm a Jubu. But to me, I think it's important to understand that, yes, I identify as a Buddhist. I've gone through formal rituals and trainings and gotten all your little Buddhist-y names and things like that. And you've heard me talk about, kind of downplay that, because it's not really, I don't find it that important, right? I could give you some Buddhist name, but that doesn't make you a Buddhist. What makes you Buddhist is in your mind and in your heart and your intention of looking at what the Buddha taught and practicing that. And if you come to a place where you feel like you want to refer to yourself as a Buddhist, identify as a Buddhist, then beautiful. But, contrary to so many, and this isn't a knock on other religions, but contrary to so many other religious ways where it's like, I'm going to convert, from Judaism to Christianity or Catholicism to Mormonism, whatever it might be, that doesn't really kind of play out in Buddhism, because you can be Buddhist and have all your other religions as well. So you could be a Jewish Buddhist, a Christian Buddhist, a Catholic Buddhist, a Mormon Buddhist. On a very formal level, yes, there are refuge ceremonies, precept ceremonies, Buddhist rite ceremonies that one can go through. But just because you go through that, you could then go out and still do a bunch of stupid shit the next day. It's like 20 years ago when I was in Taiwan, and back then pre-Uber and all that kind of stuff. But if you get into what I would say then is, if you got into a taxi here, so many of the taxis would have, the cross hanging on it, right? Well, that doesn't mean that the person driving it is following everything that Jesus said. Well, if you're in Taiwan 20 years ago or today, you'll see a Buddha hanging from the dashboard. But that doesn't mean that that person is doing everything the Buddha said. So, anyone in here grow up Christian or identify as Christian and not do every single thing Christ said?
Certain origin.
That's right. Yeah, so it's kind of the same idea. For me, personally, Buddhism is important to me because it changed and saved my life, and it made me go from being an angry, pissed off, miserable person who wanted to die half the days to finding peace in all the madness. And so I identify as it, but the challenge is to identify as a Buddhist without the ego of being Buddhist, because that defeats the entire purpose of what being Buddhist actually is. A lot of Zen teachers will tell you, you should never say you're Buddhist, because that means you identify as something, and if you identify as something, then you completely miss the entire purpose of being Buddhist. So now I'm just going to confuse you, if I haven't already. Does that answer your question? Did I come close?
Yes.
Yeah. What is there a follow-up thought to that, or curiosity, or?
No, I was just curious. I'm not a religious person, and I kind of shy away from that. So
Yeah.
I feel like Buddhism speaks to me.
Yeah.
But I knew there were some rituals or precepts and some other stuff that I'm not aware of that you go through, and so I was just curious what that process was.
Sure.
Not that
Yeah.
I'm going to do it, but just what it was.
Yeah. And I think just a side note before I comment on that is that what you'll get more often than not in a Western country with people who grew up not Buddhist is you'll hear people say, I practice Buddhism, or I observe Buddhism, or I like Buddhism, or I'm Buddhish, right? I've heard that term a lot. Where they identify with the teachings of the Buddha as opposed to calling themselves Buddhist, because a lot of people come into Buddhism have issues with religion. And so they then don't want to identify as being this Buddhist person because they have a lot of hang-ups around religion, which is fine. But, the ritual and the ceremony, that exists in Buddhism just like it does in any other religion. One example, so for, let's say China 1,000 years ago, right? There were a lot of tax breaks and many benefits to be a Buddhist monk. So what people were doing in China is they were putting on robes and shaving their heads and running around and telling people that they were monks. So they started a tradition where if you were actually a monk when you took refuge, and that's kind of the first formal ceremonies you would take refuge, they would then take 3 incense sticks and burn them into your forehead. So that's a tradition that still exists today. If you go to Taiwanese Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, you'll see monks and nuns. You go down to Shifang Temple, half a mile from here down the street, you'll see the nuns there in the robes and the shaved heads, and they have burn marks right here. Because what happens is when you burn into your skin, the hair then doesn't grow back. So, you don't want to do that? No? That's step one. That's like your entry. After that, it gets ugly. But I point that out only to show that there are formal rituals and things like that in Buddhism, just like there are in other religions. But for those who are maybe brand new to it, Dharma Bum Temple philosophy, nobody, for the most part, comes here as Buddhist. We're not trying to make you Buddhist, and nobody leaves Buddhist. Just be kinder and gentler and happier to yourself and others, and that's all Buddhism ultimately really cares about. Yeah.
I'm having a problem, or not a problem, but I'd say a problem, understanding the idea of spirituality and also the idea of a spirit. So you've mentioned spirituality a few times. I'm in a process of identifying spirituality in my own life. So how would you, if you were in my position, how would you work through that?
Yeah, I don't know, because for me, the question, to paraphrase for those virtually maybe didn't hear it, is around spirituality. How would I define spirituality? You're going through a process in your life of kind of struggling, wrestling, having a problem with spirituality right now, what it means to you. I can start from personal experience. I've never considered myself a spiritual person. Period. Right? I've been running this place 18 years. I've been into Buddhism 25 years, practicing every day for 20-something years. I don't consider myself a spiritual person. I like what the Buddha said. It's, to me, very logical. I don't consider his teachings spiritual. I consider his teachings logical and practical. Now, you really have to get into semantics and how one defines spiritual, which is kind of what you're asking me. What I'm telling you is, I don't know. Because I look at the Buddha, his teachings, the first thing he said is the first noble truth. Life is filled with dukkha, tremendous suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, death, loss, as well as simple things like your latte being made the wrong way. Right? That's the first thing he said. Not that your latte is made the wrong way, but that we experience a range of suffering in our lives. I don't see that as a spiritual experience. I see that as reality. Second thing he says is, let's look at what the cause. All of the Buddhist teachings come from this, truly. And he said the second thing is, let's look at the cause of this suffering. Greed, craving, desire, anger, and ignorance. Meaning we think our perception is right. We're angry at the way the world works. And we always want more. I don't see that as a spiritual thing. I see it as a reality. And so he said, practice generosity to overcome greed, compassion to overcome anger, and wisdom to overcome ignorance. I don't see spirituality in that. I see that from no longer being mean and cruel and stupid to being kind and compassionate and nice. What my parents taught me when I was 5 years old. Still don't see spiritual awakening happening here. Third thing he says is there's an ending to our suffering, and that is nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. Even nirvana, liberation from suffering, I don't see as a spiritual experience. You ever been really depressed? And you ever been really happy?
Yeah.
I don't see those as personally as spiritual things. Depression sucks. We like happiness. Why does it have to be some grand spiritual thing? And the fourth thing he said, the fourth noble truth, is the Eightfold Path. Follow, he was very simple. All you got to do is 8 steps. That's it. 8 things to figure out how to end your suffering. Work on having correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. This is all, in essence, addressing our moral, ethical conduct and behavior and our actions throughout our day. Don't be greedy, right? Say kind things. Don't be mean. Don't gossip. Don't slander. Again, I don't see spiritual practice. I see being a nice, decent person. And that, to me, is the heart of Buddhist teachings. What I think people struggle with in a Western context is, for the most part, we're all raised in some other religion. And if we like it, we have no problem with religion or spirituality. If we don't like it, and we're anti-religion, then very often, I'm generalizing here, but very often people say, well, I'm anti-religion, I'm spiritual. You're wrestling with what that even freaking means. Very often people wrestle with that because they don't like religion, but they want to identify as something, so they're like, I'm not religion, I'm spiritual. What does that mean? That's your problem. You have no idea what that means. That's why you're asking me. an absolute stranger. You want me, an unenlightened, ignorant fool, to tell you what spirituality is. Impossible. Does that help? Because I didn't answer your question at all. All right? And if one wants to label what I just described as a spiritual experience, again, I'm a Zen practitioner, right? When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. Simple. One could also take the flip side of that and say everything is a spiritual experience. Brushing your teeth is a spiritual experience. Combing your hair, I don't worry about that, Walking across the street or going across the street, every moment is a spiritual experience. Because when I think of people saying things are spiritual, I think of it as being like this, some big thing. And I think what Buddhism is trying to get us to understand is that everything is a big thing. It all matters. It's all important. So our entire life doesn't have to be, well, there's my life and then there's a spiritual experience. Next time you eat pizza, make that a spiritual experience. So.
And I have a follow-up.
Yes, of course.
You were talking a lot about like reacting.
Yeah.
And this is only my second week coming, so if it's a dumb question.
No dumb questions.
Okay, great. Does that hinder like proactivity or progression in any kind of way?
You mean, say from like an activist standpoint?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not at all. There's Thich Nhat Hanh. I always refer to him as an example, but he kind of coined the phrase what's called engaged Buddhism. And, marched alongside Martin Luther King, was huge in social justice, racial justice issues. And for me, I see Buddhism as an activist, a radical expression of kindness. But to fight against so much of the oppression that exists in this world, but to fight against it without anger and hatred, right? But to do it with love and compassion for those that are oppressing you. That might be a little more spiritual than pizza, right? But so it's definitely not. Being mindful of reactions doesn't mean that when somebody is physically, mentally, emotionally, or just metaphorically abusing you, or literally, or that you just say, well, I'm Buddhist, I'm not going to react. No, one should take action. Remove yourself from that situation, whatever it is you need to do to keep yourself safe and protected. It is not I don't see Buddhism as a passive thing where it's like, oh, I'm just going to sit under a tree and meditate and life is good. That's an escape. I see Buddhist practice as very aggressive, very passionate, very radical, very activist-like. But again, to fight against all those forms of oppression without anger and hatred. That's the practice. Does that address what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's hard. Because it's so easy to hate those that would oppress you. Right? I mean, I'm a heterosexual, white, male, able-bodied, Jewish, right? I've never been oppressed for anything. I have every privilege there is, so I have no idea what that is like. But Buddhist practice has taught me I need to spend every moment of my life fighting for those who are oppressed. Otherwise, I'm just sitting there like a privileged asshole. Yeah. In case you want to know what I really think. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
You talked earlier about slowing down the thoughts, and I think since I was a kid, my thoughts were just very quick. And my thoughts, obviously, like most people, turn into action, which is also very quick action. And that serves me at times, but also injures me as well.
Yeah.
So I guess how do I apply? I go to action of the Eightfold Path, right? But how do I apply that in those moments?
In that moment.
And
Yeah.
be more mindful, or just don't take that action as quickly or give it time to pass.
Sure. So the question for those who didn't hear it virtually was, I talked earlier about mind, slowing the thoughts down or watching the thoughts, and you said your mind, since you're a kid, goes really fast, and sometimes reacting really quickly is beneficial, and sometimes not so much. How do you kind of jump to the Eightfold Path or use this practice to help you kind of create space, is what I'm hearing you say before acting, right? How long have you been meditating?
4 years.
Okay. So, in the simple fact that you've asked that question and that you're exploring this, to me gives rise to the fact that it's helping you. Or you wouldn't still be at it, and you wouldn't be asking these questions, right? I'll give you an example. One of my favorite stories, 15 years ago as a kid at KPBS. He was 20 years old. He'd been meditating all of like 3 weeks. And I went in on a Monday and I said, he came up to me and he said, "Hey Jeff, I think I figured out how this meditation practice can help me." And I said, "How's that?" And he said, "Well, I was at a party Friday night and this guy was talking to my girlfriend and I got really angry. And I realized I should take some deep breaths and walk away." I was like, "Beautiful, what happened?" He said, "I punched him." And I was like, "You hit him?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Congratulations." He's like, "Congratulations, Jeff, I got into a fight." I said, "Yes, but you saw that there was a moment that you could have walked away or done something else. You didn't act on it, but you could have." So I'm sure, whether you realize it or not, in the last 4 years, there have been moments that you have not acted on every ridiculous thought you've had, right? And this mindfulness or meditation practice, whatever you want to call it, my guess is that you've also acted on some of the ones you shouldn't have acted on, and then realized, I shouldn't have acted on that, right? Well, 4 years ago in a day, you might not have thought you shouldn't have acted on it. You would have just acted on it and everything would have been fine. So you are learning to create space and seeing where you need to kind of cut in. And I haven't even gotten to the part about, well, how do you then bring in the Eightfold Path to this stuff, right? But I point this out first to say, I don't like to use the word progress, but just keep at it. The longer you practice. 4 years sounds like a lot for most things, but you're how old?
36.
Okay, so for 32 years, your mind has been like a freight train going off the rails, And that's 32 years going off the rails and 4 years of like trying to slow it down. So you're doing great with that. Keep at it, because 4 years from now, it'll be a little bit better than it is today. Then the question is, okay, well, when I create space, if I can create a split second, then so many of the choices you make will be different. And this is where, again, it takes time. But when we look at the Buddhist teachings, and this also kind of talks about goes into the spiritual question, the heart of Buddhist teachings says that there is no self. Now, I don't want to drop this all on you at the very end here to confuse you. It doesn't mean we don't exist. It just means that we exist very differently from how we perceive ourselves to be. So when you do something that you probably shouldn't do, to feed your craving, your desire, your ego, who are you focused on? Self. So within every choice that you're about to make, if you can have an anchor, a trigger, right, to say, is this about me? All you need is about a split second to ask yourself, am I being selfish? Because that question will take you directly to the Eightfold Path, starting with the correct view. The first view of the Eightfold Path is, do I see that life isn't all, this is my interpretation of it, do I see that life isn't all about me? And for all the stupid choices and things I did in my life, the only person I thought my life was about was me. For my first few years, I wore mala beads. I had one I would wrap around my wrist, because when I got angry, I'd make a fist. Because I like to punch people and things. And so I made a fist, and what that meant was I grabbed the mala bead, and it was that was my trigger. Some use your breath, but I didn't have time for that. I needed it quicker. So, you could carry around a rock, a stone, something that immediately anchors you to, what's your name? Sorry.
Justin.
Justin. Something that immediately anchors to you like, hey, Justin, this ain't about me. And one split second and one breath is sometimes all we need to not make a choice that will ruin the rest of our lives or somebody else's life. But we need that. We don't need at that moment, you're not going to go sit down and open up some Buddhist sutra and do some hour-long meditation or discourse on the Eightfold Path. You just need a quick moment to say it's not about Justin. And then step away and take some breaths. And bring in the teaching of impermanence that says whatever you're angry about, whatever you're being greedy about, whatever you're selfish about, whatever you're wrapped up in, will change. So don't do the stupid things that you're going to look back on and regret. You know? So, just an idea. Yeah. Oh yeah, there's a comment here about, in essence, the exact same thing you just asked. So, and a thanks for the movie recommendation of Kumare. So for those who haven't seen it, Kumare. We'll do one more question. If anyone's got a question before we close. Yeah.
A lot of things. I'm a dad. I'm an addict. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a nephew. I'm a grandson. And by and large, a lot of the reason that I'm here is to make myself better at those things. Am I missing it? Am I am I pointing inward? Am I doing it for the right reason?
Sure. Yeah. So, the Buddha talks about craving and desire and sense of self leading to suffering. But he also says there's healthy cravings, healthy desires. The desire to be a better husband, a better father, a better, all those things, that's not bad. It's not wrong. You're not doing it wrong because you're trying to be a better husband. Just understand that, and even in the way you ask the question, it, to me is really beautiful because you see that you're all these different things to all these different people. But you're not just one of those things. You're not just a husband. You're not just a dad. You're not just an employee or whatever else, a volunteer around here. You're all of these things. But none of those things define exactly who and how you are. The challenge is you may define yourself by those things. That's where you may get yourself into trouble, is if you say, here's my idea of being the perfect husband. Right? Be a better husband than the one you've been. Don't focus on being this perfect husband. If you focus on being a perfect father, the word perfect, man, that's a heavy standard. Focus on being, and I'm just using these as examples, these aren't, personal. If one wants to be a perfect father, try to be a better father than the one you've been. It's kind of my example always where I say I don't wake up and think all my suffering is going to end today. I think, can I suffer a little bit less today than I did yesterday? So it's kind of the baby steps of doing these little things. I mean, I think it's beautiful that you're doing this practice for the benefit of others as well. And in that process, you're kind of tricking yourself into actually maybe being a kind, happy, gentle person. Right? So yeah, you're not doing it all for you. You're doing it for others. Because we all know the whole bunch of ultimatums you've been given, So there's nothing wrong or bad about that. But I would also say, in potentially in your case, potentially with this question, that non-self, you're still there. And you have to give yourself some love and compassion also. And if you roam around feeling like you're failing as a husband or a father, or for anybody in here that this might relate to, if you roam around thinking that you're failing as this person, those feelings don't feel good. And when we don't feel good, we do things that actually just perpetuate the things we were doing before that make us feel the way we feel, if that made any sense whatsoever. So keep at it, goes back to, I'll close with this thought, it goes back to the very first thing you ever said the first time you sat here 5-6 years ago, whenever that was. Do you remember what it was?
That's about anger.
And you asked about anger, and you used what as an example?
Use my dog.
You used your dog as an example, and it's next to the story of Cole punching the dude. This is my second favorite story, where you said, first day here ever, sitting in the front row right here, said, I just want to come home and have my wife be as happy to see me as she is to see my dog. And what did I tell you?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
I said, that's never going to happen. You were aiming for perfection. You wanted her to be happier seeing you than the dog. And what I was trying to get you to understand was just try to get to where she's just happy to see you at all. Forget about trying to get to dog level. Perfect? And,
Yeah.
here. Yeah? All right. So I'm going to close on that. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to Baxter during their time of rebirth. May they always be at peace. And may they always be free from suffering. All right, so before you head out, our host Anna has a few announcements for us all. Thanks, Anna.
No problem. Hello, everyone. I'm tonight's host, Anna. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction, and our food redistribution program is every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and also posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it, then bring it back whenever you are done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here.